History remembers Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox as Grant's magnanimous triumph. But what about the man who stood in the shadows, refusing to yield? James Longstreet, Lee's most trusted general, didn't just reject surrender, he defied it. This is the story you've never heard, of a commander who guarded supply wagons with dwindling hope, who silenced officers begging to raise the white flag, and who snapped at Custer's arrogance, "I'd never surrender to Sheridan." Lee's legendary "I would rather die 1,000 deaths" was born from Longstreet's stubborn resolve. Even as the Army of Northern Virginia dissolved, Longstreet ordered a final battle line, a defiant last stand that never came. And when Grant himself joked about their pre-war card games, Longstreet stood silent, because he knew the truth. This wasn't just the Confederacy's end. It was the death of a brotherhood. Why did Lee call him "my old warhorse" in their final heartbreaking farewell? Why did soldiers cheer for a surrender they vowed to ignore? And why did history bury Longstreet's role in the South's last gasp? The answers lie in a dusty apple orchard, a captured supply train, and a general who chose loyalty over legacy. But before we begin, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel to support our community. The Army of Northern Virginia moved along the roads leading out of Richmond. As they often did, Longstreet and Lee rode together, with Lee regularly seeking Longstreet's perspective. During their first pause to rest and eat, the two generals shared a meal with a family by the roadside. The hosts spoke with unshaken confidence about victory. Longstreet stayed quiet, but Lee responded, "Whatever happens, know this, that no men ever fought better than those who have stood by me." By April 4th, the Army had crossed the Appomattox River and arrived at Amelia Courthouse, anticipating stockpiled supplies. Instead, they found nothing. Scouting parties dispersed across the countryside to gather whatever food remained. This foraging delay cost them a crucial day, allowing Grant's Union forces to close in via parallel routes. Longstreet positioned Charles Field's and Cadmus Wilcox's divisions to guard the supply wagons during the search. The lost time proved disastrous. Union troops cut off Lee's path to Jetersville, forcing Longstreet's advance units to turn north toward Farmville. Longstreet organized his battle-tested men into defensive lines at Rice's Station, waiting for Richard Ewell's reinforcements. Lee grew increasingly agitated as they waited through April 6th, with no word from Ewell. News finally arrived. Ewell's forces had been ambushed at Sailor's Creek. Lee rode out with William Mahone's division to assess the situation. From a high bluff, he watched retreating Confederate soldiers scatter and asked Mahone, "My God, has the Army dissolved?" The battle resulted in the capture of Generals Ewell, Kershaw, and Custis Lee, the commander's own son. That night, Longstreet withdrew from Rice's Station and marched his troops back across the Appomattox toward Farmville. Soon after, Artillery Commander Brigadier General William Pendleton and other officers approached Longstreet, urging him to suggest surrender to Lee. Longstreet refused, stating he'd never undermine Lee and that he still believed their men could whip 4 times their number. Until that changed, surrender wasn't an option. As Longstreet and Lee rested near the Confederate lines, a courier arrived with a letter from Grant demanding the Army's surrender. It read in part, "The results of the last week must convince you of the hopelessness of further resistance on the part of the Army of Northern Virginia in this struggle." After reading it, Lee handed the letter to Longstreet. The latter, having once been friends with Grant, scanned the message and returned it with a curt reply. "Not yet." Lee then drafted a response alone, dismissing Grant's claim of hopelessness but requesting surrender terms. He sealed the letter without showing it to anyone and sent it via courier. Longstreet later recalled a moment during the retreat that revealed Lee's exhaustion. "One evening after dark, as we rode, we stopped at a small abandoned fire. General Lee leaned against a tree and fell into such a rigid slumber I feared he'd died. The strain left him no rest, none at all, though nature begged for it. The Army resumed its march toward Lynchburg, halting east of Appomattox Courthouse on April 8th. Lee aimed to resupply at Appomattox Station, but Federal cavalry under Custer captured the supply trains. Union infantry closed in, and Grant sent another surrender letter. Lee agreed to meet Grant the next morning at 10 o'clock, but still hoped to break free. Believing only cavalry blocked their path, he ordered John B. Gordon's corps to attack at dawn on April 9th. When Gordon's men initially pushed back Union cavalry, infantry reinforcements rose to replace them, sealing the Army's fate. Upon hearing this, Lee said bitterly, "Then there is nothing left of me but to go and see General Grant, and I would rather die 1,000 deaths." Accounts differ about Custer's brazen ride into Confederate lines under a truce flag to confront Longstreet. He reportedly demanded, "In the name of General Sheridan, I demand the unconditional surrender of this army." Longstreet stared silently until Custer repeated himself, then snapped, "I am not the commander." "If I were, I'd never surrender to Sheridan." After escorting Custer out, Longstreet ordered Porter Alexander to form a final battle line with Mahone and Wilcox's divisions, the last such order the Army would receive. Alexander later claimed to recall every moment. That morning, Longstreet joined Confederate and Union officers in Appomattox Courthouse. Returning to Confederate lines afterward, he encountered Lee in a small apple orchard. The two spoke briefly. Lee feared Grant might impose severe terms, but Longstreet reassured him of Grant's fairness. As Lee turned to leave, Longstreet added, "General, if he does not give us good terms, come back and let us fight it out." It would mark their final conversation as commander and lieutenant. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to Grant at Wilmer McLean's home. Under the terms, Confederate troops relinquished weapons and received paroles to return home. After signing, Lee rode back to his men, who, despite cheering, pledged to keep fighting when told of the surrender. Longstreet, Gordon, and Pendleton later entered the courthouse as Lee's appointed commissioners. Approaching McLean's house, Grant noticed Longstreet dismounted and clasped his hands before embracing him. The Union general offered a cigar and quipped, "Pete, let us have another game of brag to recall the old days which were so pleasant to us all." They parted quickly, and Longstreet assisted with parole preparations. On the night of April 11th, Lee and Longstreet shared their last camp. The next morning, Lee prepared to depart for Richmond. At their farewell meeting, Lee embraced Longstreet warmly, then addressed Captain Tom Gorey beside him. "Captain, I am going to put my old warhorse under your charge. I want you to take good care of him." With that, Lee rode away, never seeing Longstreet again. Longstreet left later that day, contemplating a civilian life in Texas, a world he hadn't known for 27 years. As Longstreet rode west toward Texas, he carried more than parole papers. He carried the weight of unanswered questions. Why did Lee's final act, entrusting his warhorse to a junior officer, echo like a funeral dirge for their cause? Why did Grant, moments after ending the war, joke about card games with the man who just days earlier refused to surrender? History reduced Longstreet to a footnote, blaming him for Gettysburg, ignoring his defiance at Appomattox. But here's what they won't tell you. Longstreet's final battle line was never meant to fight. It was a message to Grant, to history, that the South's backbone didn't break. It bent under the weight of starving men and a general who chose mercy over myth. Lee's surrender began America's reunion, but Longstreet's story, it began a reckoning with loyalty, with legacy, and with why we remember heroes as marble statues, not shattered men whispering, "Not yet," to the inevitable. So I leave you with this. When the last campfire cooled at Appomattox, did Longstreet truly believe Texas could erase 27 years of war? Or was he already drafting his next battle? not with swords, but with history itself? Drop your theories below, because this isn't the end. It's the crack in the monument.